Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Playmore69, aka Michael here, and this is the All in All Podcast, episode 18. And in this episode today, I'll be discussing a little bit about the anti-work subreddit and also the WorkReform subreddit, which are two subreddits that have been on my mind a lot recently because, well, recently the WorkReform subreddit actually was created just I think 4 days ago. I think it says it was created on the 26th. And a little bit about the anti-work subreddit, obviously with the Fox News interview that went kind of viral, at least in some political sides of YouTube, at least I saw. I know it was on the front page of Reddit. I'm not actually going to react to that video in this podcast, but I will definitely leave a link down below to the video. I just heard that some creators on YouTube that have uploaded that and actually done commentary over it have actually got their videos removed. So I didn't want to have that for my podcast. And I know a lot of people have seen that Fox News interview, and I will discuss it a little bit. But the link will be in the description down below for that. So I guess jumping right into the podcast, let's talk a little bit about the, interview first. I guess that's where this story kind of starts. Actually, I'll backtrack a little bit. I'll backtrack to the anti-work subreddit before the interview because it was actually gaining popularity for about 3 years. So at least rewinding all the way back to around 2020, that's when I actually discovered the anti-work subreddit. And obviously I subscribed to it because I found it very interesting, but I thought the name was a little misleading because it felt like to me that the anti-work subreddit was more of a subreddit for work reform, we'll get to that later, rather than it was a subreddit for just not working entirely, because it seemed to me to be a subreddit full of people who didn't like their job, didn't like the working condition, thought it was just not up to par of where it should be, which I can fully agree with. And that's why when that sort of thing was talked about on the anti-work subreddit, I agreed with it. Because obviously working conditions, at least in the United States, for minimum wage jobs and so forth, are probably not ideal for a lot of people. And, obviously I agreed a lot with that. I subscribed to it. I would be a frequent reader on the anti-work subreddit, and I could get behind a lot of the things they were saying along those lines. When it actually came to not working straight up, entirely, that's where I didn't really agree with it. So I kind of felt that anti-work from the beginning had sort of an identity crisis in the way that they really didn't know how to brand themselves, because even though their subreddit was anti-work, it seemed more like work reform, the subreddit that just popped up half a week ago. And, obviously I was a subscriber of it for almost 2 years before this Fox interview thing sort of happened. And, I could agree with a lot of what they said. So the Fox interview happens, and apparently it was a mod who went on. Apparently this person was actually the founder of the subreddit, if I'm not mistaken. And this person should have known that they were not capable of actually going on Fox News and doing this interview, because this person was actually autistic, and that's not anything against autistic people. It's just this person couldn't make eye contact with the camera. There was not proper lighting in the room. The camera was not even set up correctly to where it was actually slanted. They were not prepared in a sense of having some sort of formal script. It didn't seem like they even went through any of the questions that the host was actually going to ask them. it seems like this wasn't prepared. And this was like a 3-minute interview, but literally in 3 minutes, everything got destroyed for anti-work, just like that. Because well, at least I thought, a lot of people said like, oh, this is the end of anti-work, which I actually have checked just now, that the anti-work subreddit is actually going quite strong. There's actually 1.7 million members now. When they actually went on, when they actually had the Fox News interview, it was actually 1.6 million, so it's actually 1.7 now. So it has actually increased, but I don't know if that will be the actual end of anti-work. I think that it will grow a lot slower now, because I think that a lot of people have actually seen it and know that, well, or if these are the people that are actually running the subreddit, like the mod or the founder who actually went on Fox News and had that terrible interview, I don't think many people are actually going to want to join this subreddit and be a part of, you know, whatever they're trying to push. And the interview really, you know, it's only 3 minutes, but I mean, it didn't seem like anything went right for the actual founder or mod who did the interview, because, you know, it didn't seem like they had a lot of good points, because like even when they were asked about their job and how many hours they work, apparently they're a dog walker and only work about 25 hours a week and actually want to work less than that. I mean, if I only had a 25-hour-a-week job, I would take that in a heartbeat. And I think 24 hours or 25 hours a week is, you know, a little bit too little hours to work in a week, at least for like a full-time job. So, I mean, that right there just seemed like kind of off. Like, you're representing, you know, 1.6 million people who complain on your subreddit about, you know, how hard of jobs they have, and, you know, they're working 60+ hour weeks, and you're going on an interview of Fox News and only working a 25-hour week job. So it seemed a little odd to me. Also, I think another problem was like, then they went into like what they wanted to do, like other than dog walking, which they actually wanted to teach. And of course it was philosophy, the most Reddit thing you could even think of. And it seemed like that at that point, the host really got them into a corner where they couldn't get out of. And I think the worst thing they said was laziness is a virtue. So yeah, I mean, the entire interview was shit. You know, it's probably at least the decline of anti-work. I don't think that they're going to grow as much as they recently were, because in the past 2 years they went from like 100,000 members to like 1.6 million. So after that interview, it's basically, you know, they're basically over. But I think that's the end of the anti-work and Fox interview segment. I'll have them linked both down in the description below. But the one that I actually wanted to talk about, and this subreddit really got me thinking about at least like doing a podcast fully dedicated to like the anti-work drama, and this new subreddit that just popped up, and it popped up 4 days ago. It's called WorkReform, r/WorkReform. This will be in the description down below as well. And I definitely recommend you subscribing to this subreddit, because this subreddit, in my opinion, is very amazing. And it's already got almost 500,000 members in the span of 4 days. So obviously it's growing quite fast. And this subreddit, I think, has a lot of things going for it. I think that this was anti-work in essence. It just wasn't named this way because, at least for anti-work from the outside looking in, it seemed to be mostly work reform. There was a lot of people complaining about their job conditions, wanting to fix them. And this new subreddit, Work Reform, really addresses all of those issues. And I found myself really falling in love with this subreddit. Like, everything that they have posted on here, I agree with. And it is also really cool from a political standpoint of seeing the, you know, kind of like political divide in a lot of things, but from looking at this subreddit, there actually seems to be a political coming together in a way. Like, I've seen people from the far right and the far left even come together and agree on this subreddit. There's a screenshot being shared around on the subreddit of two people who just posted back to back, and it was, one of them was saying like, I'm a communist and I agree with the subreddit, and one of them was saying, I'm a conservative and I agree with the subreddit. And it's like, that's crazy. We have a conservative and a communist agreeing on something. And that to me really shows that this subreddit actually has something going for it, because if it can at least bring together the politically divided, I think already right there, that's a plus. And I guess I wanted to get into a little bit of my personal experience kind of with like work reform and at least my job, and what I would wish it could be changed about it, and I obviously have a couple posts to read off of this subreddit, but I think I wanted to talk a little bit about my job and why I think work reform needs to come to it, because I know there are a lot of posts on work reform already that are explaining like certain job fields and certain jobs in job fields, that these are the responsibilities you have to do, and these are how many hours you have to work and all that, and this is how hard the job is, and they wish they had better conditions. But I can really only speak on it from one field, and that's the field of IT, because that's the only field that I've really worked in. So at least coming from my personal perspective on working in IT, I wouldn't necessarily say the working conditions are that bad. I think really the only negative thing is you're sitting in front of a computer for 10 plus hours a day, which to a lot of people sounds ideal, but I will say sitting in front of a computer with 10 hours a day gets quite tiring, obviously. And normally in IT you work very long hours. I think it's one of the longest working hour fields or hourly fields out there. The average IT worker works a lot more than 40 hours a week. Let's just say that. I work in my IT job around 50, and that's not counting the work I do at home. That's just counting the time I'm actually in the office physically, which is 50 hours a week. But at home, it could be anywhere from I'm working 5 hours to another 20 hours. It really just depends on what goes on. And, at least from my perspective of IT, if you're working in a bigger company that has dedicated shifts or dedicated people for shifts, like shift 1, shift 2, shift 3, then most likely you'll be in the office for your, 40 hours a week. And, you probably won't have to do much work at home, or maybe even any, really nice. But if you're working in, a medium to smaller company that does not have IT personnel on hand for shift 1, shift 2, shift 3, then just because you leave the office doesn't mean you leave your job. And pretty much you're always on call, which really sucks in my opinion, because the hours you do at home, really aren't counted, especially if you're salary. And that's a problem that I run into a lot, is that, I can be at the office for my 50 hours a week that I normally am, sometimes even more. But just because I come home doesn't mean my job is over. I could have another 20 hours at home I have to do every week. And that I feel is a big problem, at least with the field of IT, that I wish was kind of solved in some sort of way, is that there could be some sort of restriction on that. And I actually looked it up to try to find if there was some sort of restriction somewhere, and actually in Ireland there is. It's called like the right to disconnect, meaning like after a certain time, I think it's like 5:30, you have the right to disconnect, and your employer cannot contact you for like any sort of problems, and that to me is something that would be very beneficial, at least in the United States. because I don't think it's talked about a lot of like IT workers and how long hours they work. We like to, bring light to other people and, their jobs and stuff, but I never hear a lot about IT. I rarely hear about that. And, IT is a very background sort of job, but we do work very long hours. I've worked in IT for over 3 years now, and every single job I've had in IT, I've always worked way over the normal hours, way over. Especially in 2020 when the pandemic hit, I was only supposed to be working, just about 40 hours a week. And I was hourly at that point. And I ended up working like over 60 hours a week every single week. And it got very tiring, obviously. But I had to do that to keep my job. So it was kind of held over my head, basically saying like, if you don't work this 60 plus hours a week that we're telling you to work, then, you're not going to keep your job. And, that's a sort of condition that I wish was sort of fixed in the field of IT. But at least for everything else in IT, I would say it's okay. That's really my only gripe with it. But, I have a lot of other gripes, especially with like, just all fields. This is more of a federal thing of like, I wish there was some federally mandated like PTO for people. Because if you don't know, in the United States, there is no federally implemented PTO for workers in their job. It's literally zeros across the board for, mandatory holidays or mandatory PTO for workers. I mean, you could get hired at a job and, they could just say in the United States that, oh, we're not going to give you time off. And that's completely legal. They could work you every single week of the year, and there's nothing you can really do about it. And following that, I actually wanted to read a post that I found on WorkReform. I think it was 2 days ago. And this post is, I think, really good to look at from, an American's perspective, and to hear that, in a lot of other places, at least across the Atlantic, I'm more specifically referring to places like in Europe. But this post, I think, really encapsulates work reform in the United States. So this post goes, I think some of the Americans here have their sights set far too low. I see Americans in the comments and in the post saying they want 15 days of PTO. They want employers to not have the power of health insurance over their head. They want to have a system that protects them from arsehole management. They want protection against being fired for no reason. They want employers to pay their pension fund so they have something to live off of in their rapidly increasing old age. Brothers and sisters from across the Atlantic, this isn't radical reform. That's catching up for the rest of the world, or with the rest of the world. And I think this post is really telling, because for a lot of people that aren't educated on like Europe and at least the other kind of civilized world, is that in a lot of places they have mandatory 20 days of PTO, like federally. Meaning that no matter what job you work, like for instance, I know this is like the case in Europe, that you get a month off, a vacation, which to many Americans sounds totally absurd, because, I had to fight for my job that I currently work to get 2 weeks of PTO, which is 10 days. And people over in Europe can work, any job, and they would have 20 days of PTO just guaranteed. And it took me over, I think, 2.5 years of working in IT to get my first day off paid. And that was me not missing a single day, working overtime, working at home, and that was for me to get my first paid time off. And, I think that there's a problem there. I think that people in the United States, no matter what job they work, should get paid time off. And obviously this is going to be, something that's talked about, at least in a sense of like, oh, there's going to be money that's lost. But personally, I believe that the workers themselves matter more than what is on the bottom line, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, is that workers, or at least employers in the United States, do not want to give workers times off because they want to maximize their profits. That's also why the United States is the best economy in the world, or at least the most successful one. And this is really due to the fact that we work our workers more than basically any country out there. There are a couple of countries that actually work their workers longer hours throughout the year, but when it comes to time off, we in the United States are basically the bottom of the barrel when it comes to workers having time off of work. And that, to me, is the problem. The fact that basically any other ODC nation that you look at, is they have way more time off for their workers, and we have 0 days federally mandated for time off for workers. I actually pulled up this document from the OECD nations website, and this shows that the United States, of course, has 0 paid vacation and paid holidays that are federally mandated. And the lowest one on here that I see is actually Canada with 19. So every single other country on here that I see is way above, normally in the 30s, or some are even in the 40s when it comes to paid vacations plus paid holidays. And the US is the only one at 0. Now, I think the last thing is why this kind of movement online has got so popular in the past couple of years. Because if you've seen the actual graph for anti-work and the rise of it, the subreddit, it was really 2020 is when it started rising in popularity. And this directly correlates with the pandemic. The pandemic started in 2020. I think that's when a lot of workers started getting even worse conditions because they were basically having to deal with the coronavirus along with being at work during a pandemic because, well, obviously they need to survive, and the government wasn't going to help those who didn't work really. Obviously, some people got unemployment benefits. Those people really benefited, but some people actually had to stay at work and, work through the pandemic, as did I. I had to work 60 plus hours weeks to just keep my job. And, I think this goes for a lot of people that in working in those times, it was quite tough. They probably had to work a lot longer hours because there was less people in those jobs fulfilling them. And, I also saw this interesting sort of headlines paired together on anti-work. And this was workers lost 3.7 trillion in earnings during the pandemic. Women and Gen Z saw the biggest losses. And then the next headline was world's billionaires got richer by 3.9 trillion during the pandemic. 3.9, 3.7 sounds like a direct correlation, but I don't know. Maybe that's for someone else to decide. But at least getting back to the point is that, yes, I think that with the pandemic, this has brought, at least new light on the working conditions in the United States. And I think that many people want to reform and change that. And I think that starts with maybe mandating, more time off, or at least some time off, actually just some time off, because there's 0 mandate of paid vacations and paid holidays. But also, I think it starts with, as well, raising the minimum wage. I think that a lot of people aren't really behind this yet. And this is like a lot of moderates and a lot of Republicans aren't behind raising the minimum wage. But I think that is a necessary step if we are going to help change the working conditions, because yes, you can give people paid time off. That is going to make them happier. But at the end of the day, raising minimum wage will also help, millions of people out there as well. Now, for what the minimum wage should be raised by, I don't really know. I think it should be based on how much you need to live off of. So basically the standard of living in the certain area. So I think that, obviously every single area should be looked at in the United States as like, okay, how much do you need to survive? And I think that the lowest amount, that's what the minimum wage should be. Because it seems like in most places in the United States, or at least all places right now, minimum wage is just, it's very difficult to live off of. And I think I'll finish it off here with one more post from the WorkReform subreddit, and I'll also leave this link in the description down below as well. But this, I think, really encapsulates kind of like the living situations in the United States that are kind of a reality for a lot of people. This post reads, "Capitalism bettering the lives of everyone. This is Alex. He died this year at the age of 26 because he couldn't afford insulin in America. He made $35,000 a year as a restaurant manager and couldn't afford his $450 a month health insurance with a $7,600 deductible out of pocket. This insulin he needed for diabetes was $1,300 a month. He was turned 26 and kicked off his mom's insurance. He started rationing his life savings for insulin. He died a month later. All this in the richest country in the world." I think this post is very powerful and really shows that you could be doing everything right in the United States and still, with how things are, be absolutely screwed. And this is just something as simple as Medicare, and I really haven't touched on that topic a lot in the, in this kind of discussion about anti-work and work reform. But I think that is a big topic in the United States. It feels kind of like a losing battle in a way, because as our health industry is privatized, it's a for-profit business that the United States probably doesn't want to give up, because it drives innovation while killing off the poor, because obviously they can't afford Medicare. But I think that's where I'll leave this topic for now. I've talked a lot about it, anti-work, work reform, also the Fox News interview about anti-work. Everything that I talked about, obviously, in this podcast will be a link down in the description below if you want to check it out. I highly recommend checking out the Work Reform subreddit, though. I think that it is a really amazing subreddit, and I think that, at least reading the posts that I've seen on there, is that a lot of people seem to agree with it and agree with the movement. And these are people from all sorts of the political aisle. And, that to me is probably the biggest thing that I see about this movement, is the fact that so many people with different political backgrounds can actually agree on something. At least shows to me that this seems to be a universal good and a universal thing that people can agree upon. But anyways, I think that's where I'll leave it now. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, see ya.